This is the final of the 3-part series on RBA maturity. This one's called Into the Unknown, the Final Frontier of Splunk RBA Maturity. My name is Ben Marrable. I'm a Senior Cybersecurity Strategist here at Somerford Associates. Been dealing with Splunk for many years now, but obviously you've seen this because you're on the 3rd part of 3-part webinar. So what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to start off with the checkpoint of where we got to at the end of the previous webinar. We're going to talk about operationalizing our RBA environment, making sure it's ready to go, and then we're going to go into production and then also talk about moving into the future. So previously on the last webinar, what we talked about was risk scoring. We talked about how we define our risk scores. We talked a lot about how we can develop RBA and those risk rules and make them better, you know, reduce noise, adjust the risk, all these sort of different things to tune risk-based alerting ready for going into production. So what we need to talk about now though is where we go further than that, right? So we're going to move to level 3 in terms of Haley Mills kind of journey through RBA. We're going to look at the goals at this level is to engage relevant teams. Okay, make sure that we've got the right people engaged now, because we're going to start actually being able to respond to it, make sure that the investigation has dashboards, response processes, and that, you know, we've got a UAT in process to be able to do that. We're going to ensure everything is good to go for production. We've done all of our tuning. We're pretty happy that we're in a good state right now, and we'll go into production, right? It's not going to be perfect. Talked about that in the first webinar. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we've at least reduced a lot of the sort of pain that would possibly go if you just went from 0 to going with RBA. So the way we're going to do it is really 4 steps. We're going to continuous testing, feedback process. So we're going to implement UAT, right? We need to have a UAT. This whole thing is a project, as we remember from the first webinar. So one of those phases in that project needs to be UAT. We need to make sure that we've got the relevant teams and we're engaging the right UAT to do that. We're going to make sure that we have dashboards that allow the response process to kind of help. And inside those response processes, we're going to need to develop playbooks, workflows, case management, everything else really. And then we're going to talk about how we can implement this in Splunk, and I'll demonstrate that as well. So feedback loop testing, UAT, right? Run a full UAT of RBA, engage the operational team, make sure that they are ready to provide feedback. When we do UAT, we'll always make sure that we're opening open-ended questions for them, right? We want them to evaluate their workflows to validate that what they would be doing using RBA aligns to how they perceive it to be. We're going to get that feedback looped into it and make sure that we then can build dashboards, response processes, and anything else that we need to put in place to make that as best as possible for them. We're going to run regular cadence calls just to make sure that we can respond to that feedback in timely manners, and you know, whether that's something that we have to reject the feedback and say, look, we believe this is the way it's better, but also if we can give our reasonings for that. But also if we do get feedback we want to improve on, we can get a bit more from our end users as to why they provide that feedback, why they think that would be useful, and that could help with us going forward. So we need to make sure we got regular cadence calls for that, and then we're going to implement it all the useful stuff into the RBA processes before we go into production, right? And we can basically reduce the burden on those staff, making sure that RBA is as easy for them as possible when we do that, and make sure that project kind of goes all the way through nicely. We can also then build dashboards, right? Now there's some ideas for dashboards, but dashboards can kind of expand and go into a lot of different areas. It really is the eye of the beholder in terms of dashboarding and what they would find useful for the business. But there are kind of ideas that we've seen before out there. So risk notable analysis. So a dashboard based on trying to find the noise and trying to tune RBA. A dashboard may be about making sure that when we click on an RBA event, we can go and investigate a bit more about risks going on that. So making sure the analysis is easier. Tuning lookups, reducing noise. We talked about lookups last time for risk quantifications and risk allow lists and so forth. Content developing, make sure that we actually know what track our content is going into RBA and going direct, right? This is also part of the first webinar really, and making sure we've got the right metrics to measure the effectiveness of RBA, right? We want to make sure that we can go to upper management and say, look, this is how it was before with traditional alerting. This is now how it looks like with RBA. We believe if we do a few more steps in RBA, we can get it down to this and so forth. So you've got metrics to actually compare there. And if you go to this link here, splunk.github.io/RBA, you'll find a wealth of different dashboards that are available. And I'll show you what that link looks like in a moment, which you can just grab and install in your environment, right? Because they're just, you know, XML files. You can easily get them and upload them as you see fit. Then the final thing we really want to do is make sure that we've got response processes in place, right? So RBA is changing how we detect things, right? We've got now another step, another correlation layer, but it also may require different changes to the response processes because now you're being provided with a lot more information up front. So you need to go with a lot more sort of an open-ended kind of response to the thing. It's not just this happens, I do this. It's now, well, if these combination of things might have happened, then maybe you want to kind of figure out what you need to do there, or so forth and so forth. And there are a number of ways of doing this, right? So you could either build a response playbook based on the threat objects that are involved. So if there's a URL, or if there's a process there, or if there's a known bad IP or something like that, then that might dictate what you want to be doing. So it's a kind of, if this is the case, then run this playbook, right? You might want to define something around the frequency of how often these risk rules are triggered, right? So if they're running quite frequently, then you need to do this sort of thing. If it's, you know, very rarely, then you need to do this sort of thing. Or you could do them around the risk object, right? So you've got an asset, let's do what we need to do with that asset. Who is owned by? Is it still participating in suspicious behavior? Is it still on the network? Do we need to contact it? Can we disable it? What do we need to do about it? But also, if you're a Splunk SOAR customer, there are actually a number of playbooks already built and ready to go for Risk Notable Playbook Pack, which you can find at that link there. So if you've got Splunk SOAR, you can already kind of run playbooks automatically, naturally with SOAR. So you've already got a leg up on that response processes for there. Now, doing that in ES, what are some of the things that we can do, right? First off, with any notable really, because these are just risk notables, they're just a notable alert action. One of the things we can do, add next steps to notable events, right? Make it so that the analyst goes, all right, I need to do this, in this case, that, the other, and so forth, with links to places that they can get more information, just giving it to them at their fingertips. We can make sure that what we have in incident review is relevant and not bloated and not making things more complicated. We can implement workflow actions to make sure that the navigation through enterprise security is nice and easy. So they can click on this particular thing and then run into this particular dashboard or website or whatever it is that they need to connect to. And I'll show you all of these actually implemented in the demonstration. So once we've done that, we've operationalized it, we're basically ready to go to production, right? So in level 4, the final sort of level really, but it is iterative as we've talked about before, our goals are to start using RBA in production, all right? Even though we're in production now, we've still got to be ready to tune it, improvise it as needed, expand it, plan for the future. That's the kind of level 4 that we need to do and make it iterative, right? Steps for this is go live, get feedback again. So we're getting more feedback. This isn't user acceptance testing now. This is it's live. How can we make it better? Engage anybody else that's going to be relevant to it. So purple team engagement at this level, and we're going to constantly try and keep improving. And that is level 4. So with that, let's have a look. So one of the first places I'll bring you is into this GitHub page, right? So this has, if you go to splunk.github.io/RBA and go into dashboards, you can find a number of different dashboards that are, or links to dashboards that you can grab straight out of the bat. It will take you into this particular page here. And if you, any of these, you can just click on and grab the text out of there. It might require a few tweaks for your environment, but it should be pretty straightforward and pretty good to go. And I'll show you what these dashboards really look like, but this will give you a big leg up in getting kind of dashboarding going with the tool. But then inside enterprise security, now that we're going live and operationalizing it, really, we're going to start getting risk notables, right? So We haven't really looked at what this looks like at this so far in this journey, but now essentially what you'll see is things coming back, right? So in incident review, this is your sort of regular touch point of enterprise security when you deal with actual alerts, right? So here we're going to have now what's known as risk notables, and these have a certain number of risk events tied to them. So I can come ahead and click on one of these, and it'll pop up with all the risk events, right? So we're going to see across the top a timeline of all the sort of behavior that's going on between for this particular user. This user Theodore. Just below him, you'll also see all the details pulled out of the identity list about that user. And as we scroll up, they're in bands of how much risk is applied for each particular risk rule that's triggered. So you can see them as they color up into different colors. And then down below, you can see all the risk actual events that have been applying to this particular user over time, sorted by risk score in this case, but you could sort by time or anything else. And this is where it's really important to make sure you've got a good risk message that actually tells you all the details. So your analyst can just see and go, right, okay, this has happened in this particular location, or whatever it is that they need to look at. Not only do you have this timeline, you also have the threat topology where you can kind of see risk objects linked to threat objects. So again, if we talked about responding to a threat object, we could do them in that play, but also this gives you a link between different risk objects, different things that could be going on as a security incident maybe spreads even further than just one user or one desktop or so forth. So kind of linking everything together can be really useful. If we expand this particular thing out, we can also see now as that sort of MITRE attack posture for this notable. So we've got different MITRE techniques and tactics that you can see displayed here. We can see all those incident review pieces on the left-hand side, all these fields that are extracted out. And of course, we can customize those. On the right, we can obviously go directly to the correlation search, but now we also have things in the next steps, right? So from a response perspective, I can go, well, okay, so if this bad condition is true, then do step A, otherwise proceed to step B. So you obviously be a bit more prescriptive about what you got there. And you can also provide a link to the full guide externally, right? Whether that's on a wiki, a conference page, whatever. You can go ahead and click on that and kind of add that in as a response playbook too. In addition to this, as you want to expand, you can go, right, I want to look at my risk object. I can filter down here and investigate my risk object, and that will take me to the dashboard around that risk object. I could do that there, or I can do it from the actual event page under this actions investigate risk object here. So there's a couple of places that I can do that, and that's a workflow action. I'll show you how we set those up as well, so that now we can kind of browse from here into another page. So let this just load up. I'll come back to it later actually. But yeah, so now you can see it can kind of open up that dashboard. It can populate the panels and all sorts. In terms of the workflow actions, one of the straightforward next steps, one of the things you can do is if you just come into an actual notable, then it's just down here at the bottom towards next steps. You can add them in using \n as new lines and also actions in there. You can also add in any adaptive response actions here so that you can kind of click as you want to block an IP or whatever else you need to do. Send it to SOAR so that it goes and actually does something. So your first step could be, is this worth investigating or running an automation playbook against? Yes, okay, click here, and then it goes and does it for you, right? So you can make that process as good as possible. So that's your next steps. In incident review settings, so you come to configure, incident management, incident review settings. And inside here, you're able to add comments so that when you make any changes, you'll require comments to kind of say why you've kind of made those changes. But one of the key things here to make the process easier is this incident review table, which you can use to basically show you all the different fields and the labels of those fields that should be displayed in incident review. As an alert coming out the back of any search, not all fields are going to be displayed, right? So if you wanted the field SORCE, that doesn't get shown, right? Nor does source type. Not relevant, okay, in general, in theory, so it's not shown. So although it will be in the actual event, it's not going to be shown on incident review. But if it was something you wanted, you go ahead and add field. You could add that field and then give it a label that you want to see in incident review. But this can kind of really streamline what can be shown to an end user, right? Now, obviously, all of this can be done in mission control. which is sort of moving to the future, but we don't want to touch that right now. I'm just touching on what we're going here, but things are a bit different if you do use mission control moving forward. You can also see the different dispositions you can do here as well for instant review. Yeah, so lots of different things here, as well as set particular viewpoints of what you want to see. Now, I touched on workflow actions. So workflow actions can be found under fields. Okay, so settings, fields, and then workflow actions. I've created one here, which I showed you on the actual page, right, which I've called Risk Investigate. If I click on that, what we can do is see the label, Investigate Risk Object, and it will show me the risk object field using a variable substitution. It only applies if there is a risk object, so you don't see it on everything. You'll only see it on the risk object, but it will apply in both the field menu and the event menu. So from a field menu, if you clicked on risk object, you could click on it and then go directly to this investigate risk object piece. Or if you wanted to go from an event, the whole kind of level, you can do that. And that works in search as well as in instant review. You'll see them both working. And then I've given the URL, which is the Splunk that I've got here running, and then passing particular fields across to it, right? Risk object type, and so forth. We're passing through with a variable substitution so that it basically passes it into the dashboard. So the dashboard will pre-populate with that, and then obviously run that in a new window. Then you might have noticed across the top, what I've done is create a new drop-down, a new set of drop-downs in Enterprise Security for RBA, right? This dashboard risk analysis obviously held within Security Intelligence anyway, but I've now added it to the top of RBA as a risk analysis page. We looked at this previously, but this is your kind of out-of-the-box enterprise security view of risk and the risk framework and RBA. It's got a lot of useful information, including the risk indicators, key indicators around risk across the top, the risk scores by objects and so forth. Lots of good stuff. We've seen this before, so let's move on to the next one, which is attack matrix risk business view. And this is a high-level view between notables and risk notables of what's going on here. So what we've got in terms of attributions according to different techniques and tactics evolved. So we can see coverage, we can see things happening over time. Now this is a demo environment, so it's only really been happening since this morning. Yeah, lots of good information about comparing how things are kind of progressing and also what your MITRE coverage is actually really happening. So it's a very useful dashboard. This is one of the dashboards that is included from that RBA link that you could see before. Okay, in fact, all these other 6 are from there. So I've literally just copied them, pasted them in here, and they're ready to go really, and using, you know, our risk data model that comes in Enterprise Security. Another one is around kind of tuning, right? So this is the attribution analytics. So which use cases are producing a lot of unique threat objects versus all happening on one particular threat object. You can see bubbles and so forth correspondingly to kind of highlight that really as to how it's going. You can see these particular diagrams in terms of what's happening from the risk rules to the number of risk objects. So unusual network volume of outbound traffic seems to be applied to many. There isn't too much crossover in terms of sources, but there's a few that do crossover, and then there's a huge amount of them that actually contribute towards the 7-day risk tactic threshold exceeded rule. So the actual notable events that are coming out with all the different use cases there. So yeah, so you can see a lot of good information there about actually how you could start thinking about tuning your risk rules. Then we've got RBA data source review. So these are the data sources that are powering RBA. So we can see the risk rules that are powered by particular data sources. So you can see data models that are generating it, but also certain other data you can generate from it. This is an out-of-the-box version. This is not actually aligned to, obviously, the real data here. You've got bots v3 data there, for example, but you can see how it kind of works. And then risk rules by data model and so forth. So you can kind of see what data is powering what risk rules, and that gives you a kind of a direction to tune further, right? So you might have data you've got in this environment, but actually not being used for anything in risk. So maybe there's an element of kind of tuning you can do there. we talk about risk attribution. So this is the investigate view. This is what I would have clicked on. It would have taken me in and put in Theodore into the actual risk object and show me all the details. So we can see our attack web at certain depths. We can scroll in on Theodore and we can see all the different systems and processes that Theodore's been involved in, HDOR-exe on Theodore's laptop. So you can kind of see kind of the connections between things, and you can dive into different depths if you wish to, and it will just populate a little bit closer. So you can see there's another link here to Mickey Peer, right? So if we want to go into a bit more detail, we can do that from that. You can see all the things about Theodore. So you can see his assets, his machine, see all the different things over a timeline, a different version of the timeline, the risk rules that are applying over time. Related threat objects, notables that are actually generated for him, related risk objects. So literally everything about Theodore is going on here, and we can actually kind of start browsing and processing. Now, these are all ideas. They're not necessarily what's going to work for your environment, right? We're always engaged to kind of have a conversation and kind of come up with ideas of what we could do to make the sort of RBA response process easier and better for the team. But yeah, so it gives a kind of good starting point though. And then again, we can look into Theodore and what the event breakdowns are for that particular user. Another one very similar to the previous one. You can see the threat objects they're linked to, risk objects they're linked to, all that sort of thing. And then finally, if you wanted to have a look at your risk notables in a bit more detail, very similar kind of panels that you'll see on the risk analysis dashboard as well. So these are all the dashboards that you can kind of get out and help with the response process. Everything's going to start now tracking into incident review. You'll get that risk notable. You're going to be able to use those workflow actions. You're going to be able to use those next steps. Or if you've got Splunk SOAR, you'll be able to use actually automation. What you might have actually noticed, and I'll come back to it, is that I have history here from these events. They have been picked up by Splunk SOAR automatically in this environment, and a number of different things have gone and run on that in terms of a playbook, and it's given back details about it. So we could go ahead and look in Splunk SOAR as well if we wanted to, if we had them linked up to see what's been going on if needed. So yeah, it is a very good way of doing things. One last thing that I will leave on is obviously we need to make sure that we've got good kind of growth potential. So how do we go about actually making new use cases or coming up with new ideas, right? In webinar 1, we talked about using our current events and the dispositions that are being applied to it. Well, maybe we want to kind of expand on things that we haven't done before. So we might click on here, we might go risk-based alerting content, right? So we can find content, risk-based alerting content, and then actually go ahead and say, okay, I want to know things about insider threat. So this is Splunk Security Essentials, and it's its homepage, a couple of little clicks really, and take you into the security content, filter down for things that are most appropriate for risk. And give you, again, a huge collection of content that might be relevant or useful to you, which you can then go ahead and bookmark or find it as being useful or say it's been implemented. And then as you've got that, you'll be able to then do manage bookmarks and see that events and see the process, potentially tweak the bookmark content to say is running in RBA, is tuned in RBA, and different steps rather than what's there at the moment, because you can change the lookup that's powering this particular page and all the different checkboxes. But I'm sure if you're at this webinar process, you've probably been through Splunk Security Essentials before. So I will just close on that really. So that's the content kind of mapping, so forth. So just a little summary. So we extended on the previous webinar. We've now had a 3-part series. Hopefully those that have been able to join live have been able to get their chocolate. We're operationalizing it. We've gone user acceptance testing. We're doing dashboarding. We had to respond to RBA, how to then kind of go live, right? Turn it on, go into production, and then how to improve in the future, looking at new use cases from Splunk Security Essentials and all that side of things, which is really good. And then again, some resources for you. Again, I couldn't have done much of this without Hayley Mills' great essential guide to risk-based alerting. So please do have a look at that. It's going to cover a lot of what I've been talking about over these 3-part series. And yeah, a couple of others, planning success with RBA, roadmap to success. So yeah, planning for success with RBA or roadmap to success. Thank you very much for attending. There's all the details if you want to find out any more. Otherwise, have a nice day.